Well, hopefully we're live. Welcome back. This is Speed at the bottom of the helix. Have you ever wondered how exactly bread gets to your table? Any chance there was a train involved? How will we take a look at how grain can be accurately modeled on your layout? To show us, we welcome from Wisconsin, Mr. Dave Burman.
Well, good day, or I'm going to say good day because I've got people at 1 o'clock in the morning, I've got people in the afternoon, I got people in the morning, so it's really somewhat crazy to kind of go and know all the places that this is going to. My name is Dave Burman. I've been a modeler all my life. Excuse me. I was born into this. My father was a model railroader, worked for the Illinois Central as a tower operator and telegrapher. And when he was not hanging train orders or sending or receiving code from the dispatchers, he would work on model railroad stuff. It was kind of the ultimate, if you will, home office, except he was actually in a tower. Well, because of that, I've pretty much all my life had some sort of model railroad in the basement or somewhere. But today we're going to talk about agriculture. Now, most of you probably don't have a bag of Fritos on your desktop, but definitely not on your bench. This is my modeling room, if you will, my office. It's had to do a lot of things because I work in technical support, and like everybody else in technical support, we got moved home. But that bag of Fritos represents something. You don't think much about how it got there, but along the way, the railroads had a significant step. And I brought out a little something as well. Bottle of New Glarus spotted cow. Those of you who know Wisconsin know that may be our #1 illegal export because it's only supposed to stay in Wisconsin. But all of these products have some sort of connection to agriculture. So I'm going to go ahead and share my PowerPoint. And we'll put that up. And I'll get it up in a decent size so you can see it. There we go. And when we talk about against the grain, I'm going to speak specifically to grain modeling. I could spend a lot of time on dairy. I could spend on beef cattle. I've done a lot of research in those areas, but there are people who do that far better than I do. So when I say agriculture starts with a seed, in my case, the seed was a little tiny short line railroad in my hometown of Waterloo, Iowa. The Waterloo Railroad really wasn't big. It basically ran from Waterloo out to a number of industries. It was an old interurban. When they stopped running the trolley cars and the trolley engines that ran the freight was valuable enough, they said, let's keep it around. So they basically sold off the freight operations to the Illinois Central and the Rock Island. The Rock Island contributed some SW9s, which ended up painted something like this. But I was lucky. I grew up about a half block away from this railroad as they were going every day over to do about their switching duties. And one of the things they switched was the John Deere Waterloo Tractor Works. Waterloo has a lot of things it's famous for, but probably the most famous thing that comes out of Waterloo are green tractors, because it was the primary, now the #1 point that actually makes agricultural tractors. Waterloo also makes all of the diesel engines for products that Deere produces at the Waterloo Engine Works. They do a variety of other things. They have a huge electric foundry now, but at this time they had a blast furnace and they were producing tractors as fast as they could get them out the door. Well, being a 6-7-year-old kid, I got into tractors. And if you know anything about Iowa, there's a company called Ertl here, and Ertl makes toy tractors. So I'd go to the local agriculture expedition, I'd get a tractor. But downstairs on the railroad, there was always an HO scale dummy locomotive I could push around. I wasn't allowed to run the railroad yet. Matter of fact, if I got anywhere near the control panel, I might have got my hand slapped. But I was still kind of thinking about what it was. Well, grow up a little bit, went to college, ended up teaching professional photography for 24 years. I was a photojournalist, taught photojournalism, so I think visually more than I think with my brain some days. So I'll always have pictures. About 10 years ago, I moved to a little tiny town in Wisconsin called Trempealeau. I got interested in modeling early on because I saw the IC, and at the IC time, the IC wasn't really exciting. It was Paducah rebuilds and lots of grain cars. I got excited about grain cars, but the Paducah rebuilds, we didn't really have a model for them, and I was not good with a knife and razor saw at that time. So I wasn't that excited about it. So I got to go over to the river from time to time, and I got into the Burlington Northern. And because of that, I've slowly but surely adapted. My first railroad as a grown-up was building the river line along the Mississippi River where I live now. And now when I live in Trempealeau, I said, well, if I'm going to live in a town, I want to be close to the river. And this is the view out my window of my shop. But anyway, that's probably enough about me. I currently work as a technical support specialist for a college here in Minnesota. I have to drive across the river. You can see that I not only get to see the trains, but that thing in the background is the lock and dam, which means I get to see the barges and the barge tows too. This is about as good as it gets. And when they told me I was going to work from home, you could almost see me do the happy dance under my desk. So anyway, getting back to those Fritos. Well, how do we move the ag industry? This is from the Association of American Railroads, and it talks a little bit about all the different kinds of products and materials that go on a single rail car. Did you know that there's enough wheat for almost 258,000 loaves of bread in a single car? The one that hit me, because I'm a junk food junkie, 480,000 bags of Fritos. Cheetos too, they're made out of corn. But when I presented this for my operating group on Thursday night, the thing they always get excited about is enough barley for 94,000 gallons of beer. Obviously, our operating group really likes to violate Rule G in our operating sessions. Not to any great excess. So I went back and I said, well, what kind of impact does this have on our economy? Well, if you look at the amount of product grown, I was looking specifically for what percentages of corn, soybeans, wheat, different products are out there. I wanted to kind of see what was going on. Obviously, the big one is corn. Right now, corn is driving the bus because we use it for a lot of things. It's become a fuel grain as much as a food grain. So corn has definitely started to take over. I'm wagering a guess that percentage might be a little bit greater now. Soybeans are huge, not as much as that we use them here, although we use them for biodiesel and things like that. But soybeans are a major export to the Far East. If you've ever had tofu, tofu is a soy product. So, and a variety of other things that soybeans produce. Wheat has shrunk a little bit, but it's still pretty much dominant. But the all other crops part of it is really interesting because there are a variety of seeds and grains that are used not necessarily for food consumption that we think of just actually eating, although you can eat sunflower seeds, but they're used for other things like making oils. So it's become a pretty significant product in our environment and in our economy. And right now, that economy continues to rage on, even though the markets are a little bit messed up right now. They're dumping milk in Wisconsin right now because they can't get enough people to buy milk. Corn has gone down a little bit. I haven't paid much attention recently. So we start on the farm. And one of the problems with modeling is you have a limited amount of space. Farms take up space. Now, if you're modeling an agriculture area, you're going to have farms. And I put this one in. This is a picture out of a document that I put from the Minnesota Department of Transportation talking about farms. Well, apparently when Minnesota builds interstates, they mow down a lot of farms, and they figured they had to have a historical retrospective. If you go to the NMRA, regular NMRA site, I put up a set of links, and one of those links is the Minnesota Department of Transportation document. There are 6 volumes, mind you, of historical farms in Minnesota. And so if you need a picture reference, complete a lot of times with measurements and dimensions, it is a great resource. I put the link to the PDF. You can bring it in. When I go to do research, Google is my friend. If I don't have a picture of it, and I have a lot of pictures, I go out online and I find a lot of things. This is a pretty standard thing. I'm going to kind of use my mouse to circle over it. But one of the things that you'll notice is the area up in the upper right-hand corner. There is an awful lot of grain storage on this farm. Corn cribs. This picture was probably taken at a time when on-farm usage of grain was pretty large, and they probably fed livestock. You see a feed bunk. You see a number of feed bunks. There's a hog barn there. There's a silo that probably got hay and silage that was cut, but those corn cribs housed ear corn, which was either shelled off of the cob and fed to the cattle, or fed directly to the cattle or to the pigs. So this is a pretty standard farm. You'll notice one thing it doesn't have. It's been modernized. No barn. It does have a pretty healthy metal Quonset hut that probably was the machine shed. That's where you would house a tractor, a combine, any of the equipment that you would probably see there. Shows a variety of things. If you're modeling farms, there are a lot of great resources. Nobody's gotten real great with product on modeling farms yet. Walthers has put out some silos, they put out some barns, and there's some definitely really nice craftsman kits out there. But I think that's a place that maybe we could spend a little bit more time in some development. But again, you may only have a couple of them along the right of way. And I thought when I was doing this thing, I said, well, gee, I'm a modern modeler. My idea of planting corn or disking up a field probably entitles 32 rows. But what do I do for the guys that are doing steam or even early steam? Well, I thought about a great resource. One of the cool things about being in the Midwest, at least down in Iowa where I was, and the upper now in Wisconsin, is there's a significant Old English Amish population. And there's a significant amount of photographs of the Amish farmers doing their work. A lot of them still doing it with fairly antique equipment. You can still find old corn pickers, old threshers, all being pulled by real horsepower, not internal combustion horsepower, if you will. And I threw a barn, and this is a barn picture. This is another one of the ones from the DOT. This is a modern barn. They're actually building these again. It used to be you couldn't find a barn on a farm, and if they had one, it was either falling into itself or being torn down for barn boards that people were using in their houses for decoration. Barns are becoming a little bit more popular again. They may not always look like a barn, but they're there. This one still has the concrete stave silo, which I thought was kind of interesting. But barns are ubiquitous. If you go out and Google a barn, you'll find more barn pictures than you can possibly build in your lifetime. I know because I've tried to build a couple of them. But the thing that really took over was mechanization. If you're getting something pulled by horses, you can't pull a lot of it. In this case, probably a 2-row disc that they're kind of turning the soil over, they're plowing, and then they're disking it in to make it even, getting it ready for planting. In this case, it may have had pasture grass, and they may have pastured it just to rotate the crop so they could get some fertilizer on it. So he's mechanized about as much as he can get. But you know, the Amish aren't stupid either. They figure it out. And slowly but surely, if it's something they can use, they'll adapt it. This is actually a John Deere 4-row corn planter. And they figured out that we can plant a little bit more. We have to add a couple of horses to the mix. But again, we can modernize. We can go a little bit more modern. Well, the railroads started getting involved when some of this equipment started getting a little bit bigger. We always shipped grain by rail. We'll talk about that in a minute. But as we started to get more interesting equipment and had to get it out to people, we had to get it a little bit further down the road. This is an older International Harvester steam tractor. It's on an Atlanta, Birmingham, and Atlantic flat car. I love this flat car. I don't, like I said, I don't model the older era, but I look at this flat car and I'm going, that is really cool. The nice truss rod bottoms. This is something that could be straight out of a narrow gauge. This happens to be standard gauge, but straight off of a narrow gauge layout. And this particular steam tractor, 1913 is the date on the picture, came from the Wisconsin Historical Society archives. Another great source if you're looking. Go to the state you're modeling and start mining their archives in their historical society. You'll be surprised at this stuff. I love the state of Minnesota. It has moments at times, but I really love the state of Minnesota because their historical society is one of the most amazing places in the world. Who would put a 40-foot Sioux-line boxcar in the middle of a historical museum? They did. And it has all the original markings, including the markings on the walls of how much of each different feed grain you could put in it, because corn weighs more than wheat. So you can only put so much in. But slowly but surely, they mechanized too, and they could produce more tractors faster. They found a different way to load them. International Harvester craned all their tractors on. They didn't do a drive-on like Deere did. Again, earlier tractor. We didn't have rubber tires at that time. We're still using steel, often referred to as lugs, I've heard. Steel wheels. We've gotten to the internal combustion engine, an older diesel, maybe a two-cylinder. A lot of John Deere guys collect two-cylinder tractors around the Midwest here. And then as we mechanized even more, we could do it bigger, faster, produce more. As the farmer mechanized, he could produce more, he needed more equipment. And he made more money, so he could pay for that equipment. So now we all of a sudden have larger quantities of tractors going out there. They had to go by flat car. Again, they're still hoisting them over. And in this case, we get to see a little bit of the construction equipment. Again, this is International Harvester Farmall. Just because I grew up in a Deere town doesn't mean that I put everything in here green. I decided we'd throw a little bit of red in there too. But in this case, we see some of the construction equipment and some military crawlers. Good source for these crawlers, you might look at First Gear. They produce some of this early style. They might be a little bit too modern, but with a little bit of help, you could probably turn them back into this particular era. And they produced even more. This is Sturtevant, Wisconsin, I believe. I'm not 100% sure. I haven't found a good location on the picture yet. But as fast as they could produce them, they'd put them on flat cars and they'd go out the door. It wasn't just tractors. If you're producing it, you have to fertilize it, you have to plow it, you have to literally pick it or cut it when it's done. These are hay cutters from Heston. Heston still makes product. In this case, a nice Milwaukee flat car. We have to combine it. These are some older Massey Ferguson combines. I'm going to show you a picture here in a few minutes of how these could get modeled. It's kind of, when you start looking at HO models, we really have to work sometimes to find great models, but they're out there. They're easy to find. Ford decided, well, we don't want to put our tractors on flat cars. I don't know if that was because they were made in Detroit or exactly why, but they were done, shipped using automobile boxes from the Pennsy in this particular picture. And apparently the farmer is getting to drive his own tractor out, sort of like you can go to your car plant and watch a car being built and take it off the line. Well, we still ship tractors by rail. Deere does all the time out of Waterloo. Little bit different process though, because now a local implement dealer probably has a flatbed truck and is only getting 1 to 2 tractors at a time. Where Deere ships a lot of tractors is for export. When Deere makes a sale to China, they make a sale for 100 to 200 tractors or more. And what happens is they get put on flat cars and they are literally shipped almost as a unit train out of Waterloo down to the UP or over to the up to the CN now. It's no longer the IC, and over to the river, and they go to whatever port they're going to get loaded out of. So we see some of that mechanization still happening. Same thing with combines. Combines are fascinating to me. The ability to take something out of the ground, put it through a process that basically takes the corn off the ear, evacuates all of the waste product to the ground, the corn, the cob, etc., and keeps just the good stuff, amazes me. They are big creatures. When I was teaching at the community college in Iowa, I got the opportunity to drive one of these things. And nowadays, you don't even have to drive it. They have GPS. You're basically there just to make the turn at the end so you don't hit a fence, I guess. I don't know. I was pretty amazed. And they combine certain areas in certain ways. Science has definitely hit agriculture. So what do you think about how do we get models for this? And I mentioned Ertl. Ertl Products has always produced model agricultural equipment. They finally figured out early on that if they produced for certain scales, the model railroaders would buy it. And they've really started to bias towards O scale, but they've done a little bit of HO. What you see in front of you is an Ertl collectibles. These are getting really hard to get because they don't produce them very often. I'm hoping Tomica, who has purchased Ertl, will produce more of these kinds of things. On the other side, you have the Athearn John Deere tractor. Athearn had a run of these custom made by Ertl. Well, Athearn hasn't reproduced them, but guess what? If you have a John Deere implement dealer in your community, go over there and see if they sell farm toy models. They reran a whole bunch of these HO scale models, and they were immensely available as late as last year. Combines, different kinds of tractors, not just the modern ones. They had some of the Model Bs back into some of the Waterloo Boy stuff, the older steam type tractors. So that's a source. But I also look at Matchbox, and most of the time, if I go into the Matchbox section in my local Walmart, I don't see much that fits my scale. But one day they had this red combine. Now on the left is a really nice HO scale Universal Hobbies combine. But on the right is the one from the Matchbox box. Now, if you've been following the Twin Cities group's layout tours, William Sampson has taught me an awful lot about vehicle modeling. And I look at this thing now and I say, I can make this look good with some weathering, some touch-up techniques. Yeah, the railings are so thick you could probably never fall through one of them because you couldn't drive a car through it. That may have to do a little bit of scratch building, but I've at least got the base model. Artitech, our friends from overseas, come up with some really, really, really cool stuff. Artitech produces all kinds of vehicles. They have not only the agricultural line, but they produce cars, trucks, military models. Their M1 Abrams tank is one of the nicest ones out there. They can be somewhat hard to get as well. This one happens to be a kit of this particular combine thrasher. But remember that Massey Ferguson flat car? Here's your kit. In the United States, Reynauds, REYNAULDS.com, out of Illinois. I think it's Woodstock, but I'm not one. No, it can't be Woodstock. It's the place where AccuRail is. It's slipping my mind right now. Carries a lot of this stuff. If you search Artitech, you'll find some of the vendors locally. Walthers has them from time to time. They don't last long. Another European source that I found that has a variety of things is a company called SIKU, S-I-K-U, and I'm probably mispronouncing it. They have a lot of really, really, really unique stuff. They have some older models, and they have some construction equipment. They have all kinds of things. If you were going to do a farm and you needed a chisel plow, there it is. And this one is one of the larger ones that can fold up and do 32 rows. It would eat a lot of your railroad right away, and you'd have a pretty nice tractor scene. Again, a little bit of dull coat to just kind of take the shine off, a little bit of weathering on the tires, and you're there. But the CQ thing is what I use for loads. You have sitting in front of you, this is an Intermountain flat car, and for some reason this one looks warped to me, so I'm going to have to play with it a little bit. But CQ makes models for a variety of products. In this case, a Ford New Holland tractor, or a New Holland tractor, which are now made by Case IH. Again, consolidation in the industry. Somebody different is making it than used to make it. They're still blue. They're still Ford blue, but they're made by Case IH. And one of their and this one's sitting off the flat car because it's a toy. It has little tiny wheels. So my niece or nephew can play and roll it across the railroad. I got to cut those off so it sits flat. Then I got to chain it down. Well, Intermountain gave me some tie down chains in the kit, but if you really want to get crazy, Bernard Kopensky, Alkem, Alkem, has some amazing, amazing brass etched tie downs. I've got a few of them. I haven't gotten a set of them on a car yet. Like Perry and everybody else, I have a million projects that are going on any given moment, and having just moved and going crazy on tech support hours, I haven't had a chance to do as much as I'd like. Viking or Viking, depending on what you are, makes really nice stuff. They make some older stuff. This one dates back a little bit deeper into the 70s, but they had tractors that would look nice all the way back into the 50s, 40s even. They may be a little European, but with a little bit of decals. Sorry, the BN has decided to go past if you hear the horn. They have some nice older tractors and a lot of older equipment. I found some of the older threshers like the Amish use in their kits. So once we've got a way to get it into the ground and plant it, we got to make it grow. And this is where the railroad really comes in, because fertilizer is an essential product of every single plant component grown today. We grow so much, so fast, we have to be able to fix the nutrient cycle in the ground. It used to be, it was simple. We had a fertilizer factory on our farms. The cows, the horses, the pigs, everything produced fertilizer, and we could spread it. Well, when you go from having 30 acres to having over 1,000 acres, it gets a little bit more messy. One of the things that surrounds my little town of Trempealeau are sweet corn fields. If you eat a can of Libby's sweet corn, chances are pretty good it came from one of my fields, or one of the fields here in town, and probably grown here, processed in Rochester, Minnesota, and sent out. But they actually have to fertilize these fields. Now, they still put some manure down. One of the things we grow a lot of around here is chickens. We have a bunch of chicken processing plants, and they spread chicken stuff, manure, if you will, around, but they still have to put down a ton of liquid or mineral fertilizers. And it's usually a nitrogen connection, what we're doing. When I presented this a while back, one of the guys that I was presenting it to talked to me a little bit about why they do certain fertilizers for certain things. And it's all about the pH balance of the soil. And science has taken over here. They literally can sample soil by the square foot and literally map where certain things have to go. And they have certain custom applications. All of these fertilizer application groups can literally map a field and put it down exactly how much and what kind where they need it. Comes from a variety of mineral and refined sources. Potash, Canada. God, I love Canada. Canada produces some really interesting stuff for us modelers. One of them is potash and potash cars. I got nutsoid on covered hoppers, and so potash is really cool to me. So I've spent more money than I probably should have on covered hoppers. Those of you in Utah and out in the western states, Utah and Nevada, Colorado, soda ash, again, another product. It's basically very similar to what you would get if you burned wood, which makes a really, really nice fertilizer. When we were down in Orlando, some of us went out to the Bone Valley and visited the phosphate mines. Strangely enough, one of the trains that I really love to see when I'm looking out my window has CSX power on it. Yes, it's the BNSF, but it's CSX power, and it's strings of CSX and older Seaboard system hoppers, Richmond, Fredericksburg, and Potomac, old Conrail and Penn Central hoppers. We'll see a couple of those in a minute. It makes for an interesting variety of stuff that rolls past my window and gets used along my railroad somewhere. Ammonia, Iowa. Anhydrous ammonia is a huge railroad-based product delivered by tank car to almost everywhere in the state. If you have a grain elevator sitting right next to it, probably as part of the co-op, is an agronomy center. And sitting right next to that, or sometimes out in the country, because anhydrous is a pretty scary product if it gets loose, you'll see propane tanks, just like the ones Walthers did. And they're full of anhydrous ammonia that they transfer to little nurse tanks. And so those little nurse tanks go out and they put it down into the ground, till it into the soil. And then various acids to neutralize all this stuff. I always wondered why at one of the agronomy centers, they always had a tank car of nitric acid, or they had a tank car of sulfuric acid. That's another way of fertilizing the ground. So it's another place to put those really cool little tank cars that Athearn made, or that really nice Atlas tank car. Or if you want to go back even further, Tichy cars, different kinds of things. Well, potash moves by unit train. Almost all of these products are shipped in bulk in long trains. Earlier on, I'm sure they shipped in smaller carloads and they went directly to the producer that would actually use them. Well, nowadays they go to a distribution point where they may be trucked to the user, or they may be split into smaller loaded cars. They still do a lot of onesie-twosie cars to co-ops, but a lot of this stuff goes in bulk. One of my favorite things in Waterloo was when the potash train came into the Iowa Northern, and they'd haul it out to the Potash Corporation of Saskatchewan. Yes, there are Canadian companies in Iowa. And they had a big warehouse, and they would dump that, and then that would be parceled out to the farmers in about a 200-mile radius. And they have these things periodically. We'll look at one here in a minute. This is an aerial view of one of the places in the town I work in. This is Winona, Minnesota. This is Winona Road and Rail. And if you kind of look at it, there's an awful lot of covered hoppers sitting right here. They unload and they load. They may get a unit train in, split in half. They fill up these nice little domes. They put it on barges. They put it on trucks. They put it back in covered hoppers, and they ship it out to different users. A lot of potash comes into the upper Midwest and is shipped down the river. I'm amazed at how many of the barges I think are full going north that are full of stuff that we ship up there, but then come back, and I'm thinking grain going down to the Gulf. Oh, no, 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 no. That's pink crystal. That's potash. This is one from St. Paul, the area that I'm modeling now. This is a Cenex Harvest State facility. They don't use domes. They just use one big building. How would I model this? Well, number one, this is a lot of territory to eat up on a model railroad. But I'll give you a hint. Against a backdrop, half that building, and a Walther's grain elevator, one of the little uprights into the side of that building. And you could do this one justice, and it would take anywhere between 3 and 10 cars. You could probably even get away with putting 40 cars in there. Most people don't have that kind of space. I don't. But again, model the illusion. You don't have to do everything. This is what they look like inside. It's pretty ordinary. If you wanted to do an interior where you could see in, again, it has gratings in the floor where the cars dump. I can put in a plug. 3D printing guys out there. There are an awful lot of guys doing great 3D printing stuff. One of the gentlemen that I've become associated with, a gentleman named Mike Brusky, Dimensional Modeling Concepts, does a really, really, really nice one of these. That's a whole car dump. It's a 63-foot long grain dump space. And you need these for elevators. You need them for potash. You need them for all kinds of stuff. Phosphate transport. This is one of those phosphate trains. A little bit further up in the north. They go to a place out in Montana. This is Fields, Montana. The reason I picked Fields is because one of our local modelers in the River Rail group models Montana and models Fields. I showed him this building and he turned white. He goes, "How am I going to build that?" I said, "You're not going to build it. Not all of it. You don't have to." Number one, this building probably was erected in the last 20 years, but I said, I'll bet they had some sort of storage that was a smaller size, probably the building behind it. But I like the thing I like about fertilizer cars is the sheer variety. When was the last time you saw a Penn Central car in service today? Still in Penn Central markings. This was last winter. Conrail cars, long gone. NYC markings, part of the split of NS and Conrail. The CSX cars got NYC markings, but you don't see this stuff. It doesn't exist. Well, yes, it does. You have to look for it. You have to know what lanes it moves in, but it's out there. So all those weathering techniques, those really ugly, rusty cars, I'm doing them, folks. Oh, and they fade too. Get out your airbrush and your thin white paint. This is a new car. This car probably isn't 6 years old. I haven't pulled the build dates off of it yet. Transport, yes, onesies and twosies cars. I thank God for Pacific Western Rail. I also sometimes bite my lip because sometimes they can be an interesting group to work with, but they've produced these really, really nice NSC cars. You want these same cars? Atlas makes one in the ACF version that's just as nice. So how do we model it? Well, this is one. Fortunately, one of the good things about being in the Midwest is we have a lot of model railroads, and I can pick and choose as I need. This is from Jason Clockey's CGW layout. This is Rochester, Minnesota, Rochester Fertilizer. Let's go back a bit. It wasn't always 100-ton hoppers. Fertilizer shipped often in covered hoppers because it had to be kept dry. It works better if you keep it dry. 70-ton covered hoppers got a lot of it. And you'll see in some of the earlier pictures, you'll see a lot of that. It's bigger now. This is a small town facility, but it's easily modeled as well. This is one from the National Train Show 2 years ago in Kansas City, off of the Fremo layouts. I'm not sure if this is the Blair Line kit, but they make a kit that's very, very similar and looks very, very, very good for a small town facility. The backside. Anhydrous ammonia. You don't have to do much for anhydrous ammonia. Basically one of these big supply tanks. Walthers is there. But these were a little bit of a problem, except the 3D printing guys came through. And I picked up a set of these at Spring Creek Model Trains a while back. Beautiful little Deschler, Nebraska. If you ever get a chance to visit, it's almost scary what it'll do to your wallet. But these are a 3D product. Okay, once we grow it, we got to harvest it. The Amish, well, they had a corn picker, but today things have gotten a little bit more modernized. Back to our farm all. We used to harvest it and we'd pick corn on the ear. And then we would eventually shell it at the elevator. Well, guess what? We had to store it. Corn cribs, both wooden and steel, were a part of practically every farmer's collection. Nowadays, these things house all kinds of stuff. There's a corn crib here locally that I know is being used actively as a garage. Some people have their dogs in them. I think that's a little bit strange, but whatever. But our harvest now probably picks the corn, shells the corn, and turns it into little granules of gold that get transferred. And like every combine known to man, probably has to be transferred after several rows because when they pick, these rows are full of ears of corn. A lot of local farms have gone to metal bins. Again, different sizes, different shapes. Lots of people, Rick's Products makes a great metal bin. Walthers, a new on the scene, Iowa Scaled Engineering. They make the proto throttles. They're making grain bins now in 3D, and they're pretty nice. These things can be dressed up as detailed or not detailed as you want. Also, don't be afraid to look at your farm toy store. Even though, yeah, it's 1/64th, do a little bit of shaving of the ladders and put some HO ladders on there. The fan may be a little bit big, but most people aren't going to pay that much attention to it, and you can find a pretty nice thing. This one has a scale. It also has a horizontal grain dryer, straight out of the Walthers kit. But eventually it's got to go somewhere. A lot of the grain nowadays isn't used on the farm. It's used in processing, either in cereals, in foodstuffs, in fuel stock, in flours, in different components that can't possibly be used. We can't possibly use as much as we're producing, so we have to send it somewhere. We have to find some way to do it. The average grain elevator looks a lot like this cross section. The top part's called the head house. And then right below it, just like the metal bins, there are grain bins. And most elevators are divided. Grain is stored by the quality of product. And a lot of times it has to be cleaned or dried. Sometimes it's more dirty, if you will, with contaminants than other things. So it has to kind of be categorized. That's why they have different bins in these elevators. There's a work floor. That's where the grain is usually dumped into a pit. And then there's a big auger or a big bucket on a conveyor belt that takes it up to the bins. And the head house literally distributes it. I have seen head houses that have a rotating thing that they can just literally channel to shoot into whatever bin they want it in. Most of the wooden elevators I've seen have something similar to that when I've been up in a head house. The newer ones, all of that is done via hydraulics, pneumatics. A little bit better, you can kind of see some of that. This would be a newer elevator. This one has a distribution head along with the elevator. This one also shows a little bit of the rail loading, a little bit nicer. These resources, if you search grain elevators and grain elevator cutaways, are everywhere. And chances are pretty good, if you look hard enough, you can probably even find one that might be the elevator you're trying to model. They're built out of many materials. And this one I love because of the older Chevy truck, but the steel elevator in the background is pretty cool too. The older Chevy truck, I'm looking at this and going, this is probably a 2010 picture, and they're still using a truck from the 70s. Farmers don't throw much away. Wood elevators. This picture reeks model railroad because this would be a siding in any town. This is Dutton, Montana on the Great Northern. And how many elevators can you count? The Canadian picture a while back with the horses, same kind of thing. And these are wood elevators. There are a lot of great wood models out there. And they still live today. A couple of years ago, I went to a modelers meet in Deschler, Nebraska at Spring Creek again. Bet you can't figure out that I go to Nebraska a lot from Wisconsin. But as I was driving back, I deliberately said no interstates on the return trip. We're going to drive some roads I hadn't driven in a long time. And this is along US 30. And these are small towns still using their older grain elevators. Now, what they're probably using them for, they might be fertilizer centers. Chances are pretty good they've become feed mills, but they're still out there. This is a feed mill. Fine example of one. The older grain elevator that probably fed 40-foot boxcars into the 60s. Now, doesn't have rail service. The rail service is behind it, but it's still working. Sometimes they become decorations. This elevator has nothing in it with the corn stalk. But in the other case, they're still in use. They're still using the one with the co-op sign on the left. There's still a grain dryer attached to it. My guess is it's probably used for wet grain. Walthers makes us a nice wet, dry grain bin. We don't have to have a grain bin if we have an old elevator because that's what we got. We're going to clean the grain. We're going to dry the grain anyway. Here we go. Or it's used as a feed mill. This happens to be a square style as opposed to the more angular. But there was a problem with wooden grain elevators. They burn. If you know anything about grain dust, it's highly explosive and highly flammable. at least once a year, I either hear of somebody's elevator blowing up or somebody's elevator catching fire. One a while back, I had just photographed the elevator 6 weeks, 7 weeks, and it basically blew the head house off the top. It was that kind of explosion, plus major fire. There was just one in Omaha a while back, I remember. But they didn't just make them out of wood. How about brick and clay tile? I've seen a number of these. There's a great one in Webster City, Iowa. It's no longer used, but it's as much an antique and probably on the National Register of Historic Places as anything. And I looked at this and I said, I don't need one, but I want to build one because somebody's going to want to do this. Steel grain elevators, steel plate builds. These are kind of dying off because unless you really maintain them, they rust. Just like everything else on our model railroad, they get weathered. There was a great one of these in Cedar Falls, the town next to Waterloo, that in the 93 floods and the 2008 floods got flooded out and had to be torn down because it basically rusted out from the bottom. But steel elevators are basically plate steel curved and riveted together. I thought about how am I going to build one of these? And I thought, okay, well, if one of my friends who's modeling an N scale said, how would you do that? And I said, well, an N scale, I can get away with murder because it's smaller. I've got just a little bit of a raised edge. I can do that with striping tape from my graphic design days, line tape, or better yet, why don't I just print it on decal stock, spray paint the PVC pipe I'm going to use silver, put it on a clear decal and wrap it. And all of a sudden it started to come together. I'm still working on that one for perfection. You don't get to see it yet. I'm not quite in love. But they were different sizes. They even had their own head houses, that oval shape. That's what I'm working on that I'm fighting a little bit with. But this is really what turned me on to grain elevators. This is a concrete elevator in Alta, Iowa, where my aunt and uncle used to live. This is the first elevator I got up into. I can say I've been on the roof of the head house of this elevator. And if you are even moderately height queasy, it's a scary place to be. At this time, there were no railings on that elevator. When I went up there, there were railings and it was still scary. But I love this one because rather than paint the letters on, these letters are metal and they are fixed into the concrete. And like every other grain elevator, they have a critter. This one's a Davenport. It's kind of a 44-ton knockoff. My first locomotive ride. So I had to put this one on there. I got to be in the cab while they switched to covered hopper. But today they've gotten much, much bigger. They probably have different kinds of grain dryers. We're used to the horizontal grain dryer. The horizontal, the long one. This is a vertical grain dryer. This one has 2 of them. So they're processing grain. This is probably their wet elevator. This town has 4 different elevators from the same company. This is another one of their elevators. This is a shipping elevator or receiving elevator. A little bit different, bigger tubing. Again, Walthers, okay. They did a great one of these for the ethanol. You can still get it. It's still slip form. You can do some nice stuff with them. This one doesn't have a head house. There's no concrete head house on it. But you've got all that product, all those elevators that you can pick up. This one is in the middle of Nebraska along Highway 6. Again, like I say, I'm death for interstates if I can avoid them. Yeah, sometimes you got to get there, but I love backroading it. I don't know if this is Waverly or Glenwood, but it's one of those small towns between Lincoln and Omaha. Same trip, same place. This one happens to have, may have noted the rounded head house in the Alta one. This is a rounded head house. These were made by a company out of Omaha called Tillotson Construction. And that rounded head house is a landmark for them. If you look at the links page in the NMRA page, there's a link to a place called Our Grandfather's Grain Elevators. Everything you ever wanted to know about grain elevators is, at least the way Tillotson built them, is in that document. They have been documenting, the granddaughter of or the great-granddaughter of one of the Tillotson brothers, is going on a foray to document these things before they get torn down.
Dave, I don't want to rudely interrupt you here.
Yep, I'm getting there. I got a couple more things, and then we can chat. Okay, now they're probably metal. They're probably metal bins, lots of gingerbread structure, all available. We got some grain. I'll kind of gloss through these. These are basically just feed mills that are attached to elevators. I wanted to show some of the modeling. We got some pretty amazing models out there. We got some people growing some really nice stuff. This one is on John Parker's BNSF Fall River Division. Kappa grain, it's beautiful. I don't even want to know the cost of all the bins. Modular layout, this in case the Gulf Western guys from down in Corpus Christi, they have a entire unloading loop for large unit trains. In this case, it's got a coal train parked in it, but that's not what they're doing. This one I liked because they tried to do the grain elevator, they tried to do the grain dryer thing with PVC pipe. Some nice elevators. So goodies for building. We know all about the Walthers kits. I'm not going to say anything about them. They're great. But PVC pipe, you're thinking about pipe, go find your local neighborhood plastics dealer because he's probably got shapes. I also go to my local Habitat for Humanity Restore because I buy pipe there. The square tubing, you can get all kinds of it because it's railings for your deck. How do you do a loading structure? Well, look at the kits. This is a cinder lift from Walthers. There's a million ways this thing could be cut up, and I'm working on one right now. Smaller tubing for these nice little pieces. I'm trying that decal trick and seeing if I can make some of these. Don't be afraid of your farm toy store. These came from a farm toy store. Yes, that thing in the back, that orange thing, is miles out of HO scale. But I'm going to take the wheels off of it. I'm going to cut the hitch off of it. The ladders are going to go away. The loading pipe's going to go away, and I can find some sort of loading structure out of it. If I paint it some other color other than orange, garish gray, not going to happen. The farm toy folks have all kinds of these. Farm toy folks, again, have better bins than we do. You need a blue harvest store, they've got one. You need some smaller surge bins, they've got it. FP products, these are 1/64th, but I don't know how they scaled it to 1/64th because the ladders look HO to me. And then my last kind of goodie for building, I look at things in the hobby. If I need a duct for a loading structure, I found these things as loads. If I need all that gingerbread in that steel elevator, crane boom sections. I go to train shows and buy junk kits all the time. So another time we'll talk about some of the bigger elevators. We've gotten it to the railhead. Now we got to get it on. This is from Portland. I love this. If I ever build a tabletop layout, I'm going to figure out how to do this. Every day we went from the train show to the convention hotel, we passed this elevator, and I love it. And I'm going to say thanks for sharing. I'm going to stop sharing, and we can answer questions. Sorry, a little bit longer.
At some point, you had 198 people mesmerized to the point where we only have 3 questions. Do railroads ship into feed mills?
Yes. Yes, strangely enough, tank cars of molasses and other product. Did you know that the byproduct of packing plants sometimes is something called blood meal?
Wow.
It's a little bit weird, but they will feed blood meal from cows to cows for protein. Don't ask. And all kinds of different grains. Feed mills, spent product from the process of ethanol, dried distiller's grain, and wet distiller's grain. The next clinic I do for NMRAx in the next couple of times, we'll talk about spent grain and how they use it. There's all kinds of product that moves into feed mills.
Andy wants to know, how are these various fertilizer components mined? Are they deep mines or open cast?
Okay, the ones that I know of, the potash mines I've seen have been deep mines. They may go down into tubes. I know Bone Valley is a quarry, or at least the ones we got to see. I don't know how you mine anything in Florida. It's basically 3 feet above sea level everywhere, but they're deep down in. I don't know how to keep the water out of it.
Now, you mentioned that you never got to run a train or got close to the control panel. Did you ever run a train there?
Where? At
in your dad's basement, or?
Oh, yes. I can say I've had some really strange luck. My dad passed away when I was 7.
Oh,
I
no.
did get to run trains there when we were a little bit older and getting ready to take the layout down. My brother decided he liked narrow gauge, so he was going to rebuild. So I did get to run trains. But let me tell you, I had a little Illinois Central SW1 dummy. I switched the heck out of that railroad.
Wow.
I just didn't have motors to do it.
Well, Dave, I'm looking forward to the next clinic you're going to give, because this was just simply so much information that I think half the people in the message chat is now thinking about modeling agriculture as well.
And if there's anything you want, chat me, message me. If I have a picture or I have a source to a picture you saw, I'll be happy to share.
Thank you, sir. See you soon.